Real people, real opinions, Real Talk Radio. The multi-award-winning Niall Boylan Show.
Ireland's classic hits.
I have found it really hard to watch and really hard to read about. I'm talking about the trial of Lucy Letby in the UK. This week, the former neonatal nurse from Hereford was sentenced to spend the rest of her life in prison after being found guilty of murdering 7 infants and attempting to murder 6 others. It's just, even reading that is chilling, it's horrific. But there's many layers of complications to this case. So we really wanted to hear from someone who's been following it carefully. And joining me on the line now is Caroline Cheetham. She's a lecturer of journalism in the University of Salford in the UK. And together with her co-host Liz Hull, the two have been following this story on their incredible podcast, The Trial of Lucy Letby. This podcast is really popular in both Ireland and Australia and the UK. Before I chat to Caroline, I just wanted to put a word of warning here. The content we're going to talk about now is distressing, so it may be upsetting for some, and if there's little ears around, this is not something that they're going to want to listen to. Caroline, I just wanted to say welcome to the show and thank you for the massive effort that you put into making this podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. That's incredibly kind of you. It's been a long year actually covering this case on the podcast, but actually, you know, seeing the culmination this week, and I think our listeners have really appreciated this sort of in-depth reporting. And it's really difficult, but it's also been a real privilege to cover something like this and do it justice journalistically. We
are going to talk about the case in a minute, but you said it there, you've been covering it for almost like the guts of a year. What impact does that have on you? Because it is like, this is a very chilling case.
Yeah, I mean, I think my colleague Liz, my co-host Liz Hull, has been in court every single day. She's been in the main court every single day. I've been dipping in and out. As you said, I have a job as a lecturer at the University of Salford as well. So I've been dipping in and out. And the way we've been doing it is we just do an episode. Well, we've been doing an episode every week. So any update that we get, we cover it every single Monday. We release an episode about 5:00. Listen, the trial has been really difficult, but actually the way it was put across to the jury was quite forensic, quite scientific, quite medical, and actually at times quite dry. So our job was to make it make sense to normal people at home.
Yeah.
You probably know the way we often cover court cases is we pop in at the beginning, hear the prosecution, hear a bit of the defence, and then we come back at the end. And I think in that way, and this is no criticism of any court reporters because the ones who are left are amazing, we sort of end up, you know, doing the sort of big moments, the sort of sensationalised moments, if you like. What's been gratifying, I suppose, about this case and that our listeners have been getting in touch to say that they appreciate is the fact that it's been really measured and really sort of fair and balanced all the way through. I think that in terms of, you know, the emotional impact of it, the way, as I said, it was done was quite scientific and medical until yesterday when the absolute raw human tragedy was just laid bare with the victim impact statements of the parents.
Before we talk about that, can we go back to the very beginning? Because, you know, some people may not know about this trial. They may be hearing about it, you know, for the first time yesterday when the verdict came down. Who is Lucy Letby?
Right.
What happened?
Right, yeah, let me walk you back a bit. So This all started in 2015. The crimes that we now know were crimes took place between 2015 and 2016, over a year, between June 2015 and July 2016. What was happening at the Countess of Chester Hospital in the northwest of England was that on the neonatal unit, there seemed to be a spike in the number of babies collapsing and dying. For example, this hospital had a mortality rate of about 3 babies a year. In the space of 3 weeks, between June and July 2015, they had 3 deaths. So, you know, immediately there was concern that was a high number.
Yeah.
But added to that, some of these babies were collapsing and then dying unexpectedly. And I think just to sort of give a bit of context to this neonatal unit, not many babies go in there and are treated there and don't come home. Most of them come home, they're born prematurely, and yes, they're fragile, and yes, they need help, but they're not on the edge of life, most of these babies. They come home, and if they collapse, and if they are, close to death, the doctors tend to know. So the problem in this case was that it was so unexpected.
Yeah.
And this particular nurse appeared to be on duty every time. Lucy Letby was a nurse, a Band 7 nurse on the neonatal unit, and she appeared to be on duty sort of often. She was always around. Her presence was always there.
And had anyone noticed? Had anyone noticed, Caroline?
Well, so very early on, the man who led the ward, if you like, the unit, Stephen Breary, the consultant, had noticed. It was described as an association initially. They couldn't find a medical reason for any of these babies collapsing. They couldn't find an infection on the ward that would explain it. So then it was down to, who's on staff? Mm-hmm. And she was on every single time. So what was happening was she would, families would go for something to eat or a sleep, and she'd be alone with the baby. He or she would collapse. A nurse who was looking after that baby would go on a break. Lucy Letby would come and cover. The baby would collapse. It became a persistent pattern. And the real tragedy about this case was that the consultants were raising concerns quite early. From October 2015, they were going to managers and saying, we're really worried about what's happening on our ward. This person seems to be around. No allegations at that point, but just this association, they called it. We need some help. And nothing was done. In February 2016, they went again and said, look, we are now really concerned. More babies are collapsing. More babies are dying. Again, nothing was done. It was June 2016, and after the deaths of 2 of 3 triplets, the day after each other, that she was finally removed from the ward. And I've got to say, at that point, the consultant said to one of the managers, if she comes back, it's on your conscience.
And what are the hospitals saying? And what are the hospitals saying?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, we're not hearing very much from the hospital in terms of, we've heard it from the new managers at the hospital. They came out and talked after the verdicts and said, look, it's a different management team. We've learned lessons from what happened back then in 2015, 2016. We do things differently now. But obviously what the families and the questions that are now arising is that there were managers there at the time. Some of those managers have retired. Mm-hmm. Some are still working in the NHS, and in different roles. And I think there's a very strong feeling across, actually, I was going to say across the UK, across the world, I think now, that these managers need to be accountable. And we heard from the as I said, the ward, the lead consultant on the ward, Stephen Breary, this morning, who did say that it seems to him that doctors and nurses are accountable to the regulatory body, the GMC. Managers are not. And in this particular case, the consultants were asking for help. And in fact, not only were they not getting it, but also by the end, the managers made the consultants apologise to Lucy Letby. The managers said, we're going to bring her back onto the ward. This is a year later. We're going to bring her back onto the ward. We can't find that she's done anything wrong.
Oh, my God.
We're going to bring her back, and you must all write a letter of apology. And they had to write that letter of apology. And the only reason that she wasn't put back on the ward was because the police were then called in.
So why did that happen? Like, this is the part where I'm just going, how did they manage to catch her?
Well, the investigation was so. What happened was, in the end, the managers were forced to write a letter to Cheshire Police to say the consultants have got these concerns. We think we need to escalate now to you. This is now 2017, though. This is another year later. Yeah. If you follow the timeline. and they took a year to pull things together before they then arrested Lucy Letby. And that was 2018. And in that year, what they did was they pieced together every single shift where a baby had collapsed, or there were suspicions, or there were concerns. They pieced together the swipe data, the computerised nursing notes, the handwritten nursing notes, the recollections of staff on the ward that day, and all of it. And they built this sort of enormous jigsaw puzzle, if you like, the most complicated forensic investigation that pointed to her. There was no one had, we called it there was no smoking gun. No one had seen her do anything. But she was a nurse working on a ward. If you've got a nurse injecting into a line, who's going to query that?
Yeah.
The weapons that she used were air and milk and saline. You know, there was nothing that we could see. She was operating. She was killing in plain sight. When they arrested her, they then found, I suppose, a treasure trove of notes and medical records from the hospital and pages and pages and pages of incriminatory evidence.
And has she ever admitted guilt?
No. So she was arrested 3 times, 2018, 2019, 2020.
Yeah.
And every single time of arrest, she cooperated. She spoke. She was, polite. She cooperated. She wasn't obstructive. I think now we've spoken to one of the officers, well, the main officer who actually questioned her for over 20 hours. And her view was that she was cooperating because she wanted to know what the police had on her. So by answering questions, her view was they'd give her more information. Of course, that didn't happen. And what we had in the end was, circumstantial evidence, unbelievable amounts of circumstantial evidence, which the jury deemed to be enough.
Wow. And has a psychological assessment ever been made on Lucy? Because we can't help it. We all just go, why? What makes someone who goes into such a caring profession do this?
Well, I think that's the thing, isn't it? The why, the lack of knowing why. She was assessed in order for the court to know whether she was fit to be in the trial and fit to plead. And she was deemed to be fit. So she was deemed to be fit to stand trial and to put in her, guilt or innocence, and to stand trial and give evidence, of course, which she did, and face the trial. I'm not aware of another assessment that's been done. I'm not aware of any psychological problems. What she said that she did have was PTSD, brought about from the arrest in 2018, that she was so traumatized by that arrest it caused PTSD. Actually, what we witnessed was the most controlled, the most composed, frightening, really, how normal this. You'll have seen the pictures, Serena. The most normal human that you could. A girl next door, actually, and in fact, in our episode that we released yesterday, we called her the vanilla killer because someone described her to me and called her vanilla, and that's exactly how she comes across. But then dig down a bit, and this composure, to be arrested, to never be in trouble with the police before in your whole life, and then to be arrested for murder, and to literally just be composed. I'd be flipping tables and shouting, and could you imagine? And
completely,
especially if I hadn't done it.
Yeah.
So no, the why is the one thing we really, really don't know.
But then yesterday, we're all talking about this again because yesterday finally sentencing happened. What has the sentence been? What was she charged for? What was the sentence? And is life really life?
Well, so I'll unpick that a little bit. So she was facing 22 charges in total, 7 of murder, 10 of attempted murder, and the rest of attempted murder. And she was found guilty of 7 charges of murder, 7 charges of attempted murder, against 6 babies, the attempted murder. She tried to kill one of those babies twice. She was found not guilty of 2 attempted murders, and the jury couldn't reach their verdicts on 6 further charges. What happened in court on yesterday was that the judge sentenced her not just to 1 whole life term, but to a whole life term on every count. I know I've never, ever known anyone sentenced to a whole life term for attempted murder before. My understanding is this is the harshest sentence since the last death penalty was issued in this country. So he sentenced her to a whole life for every single count. So yes, to answer your direct question, it absolutely does mean life.
No chance for parole at all.
No.
Yeah.
The early release scheme, which is operational in the UK, he has already said she is not eligible for and never will be.
But Caroline, she's still continuing to hurt those poor families who were sitting in that court yesterday. She didn't turn up to her sentencing.
No. So the final verdicts that we heard were last Friday.
Yeah.
And the jury had been coming back sort of piecemeal. We weren't allowed to report anything until Friday, but they had been coming back with verdicts before that. The last time we saw her in court was the Wednesday before.
Mm-hmm.
And after that Wednesday, she after that refused to come back into the court. And as you say, that position was maintained on Monday for the sentence. There's been lots of debate about how should we deal with that, and so many messages to our email on the podcast and to our Twitter and etc. saying you shouldn't be allowed, drag her up, kicking and screaming, and all of that. I mean, I'm so torn on this one because imagine that the sentencing morning was about the families being able to have their moment to say to the court, a packed court, a packed public gallery, a packed annex where 60 members of the press were sitting, exactly what they've been through. And if you've got a prisoner, a defendant, in the dock causing a fuss, disrupting the court, I can't imagine how that would have been for them. So you'd almost think, would you rather her not be there than disrespect that moment? I think there are other options. I heard Robert Buckland talking about, if she's sitting in a cell underneath the court, which she was. Mm-hmm. She was at the court building. She just wouldn't come up.
Yeah.
We've all been watching it on a TV screen. Put a TV screen in there and make sure that she has to watch it.
Yeah.
Or listen to it. Make sure there's no hiding place. At least then, she isn't disrupting and disrespecting the families that she's caused so much pain to. But she's hearing what they've got to say. I'll add, actually, the judge did order that his comments and all of the victim impact statements should be given to her. Your guess is as good as mine about whether she'll read them.
I was going to say, it doesn't just because they're given to her doesn't necessarily mean that she will read them. And I never actually thought of it the way that you just put it then, because my gut was she should be in that dock. And I'm sure a lot of people were thinking the same. How dare she not give the families the opportunity to say to her what they need to say to her? Because all those families have been impacted. Some no longer have their children with them. Mm-hmm. Some still have their children with them, and they continue. This is a really stupid question, but how are the families?
It's not a stupid question at all, because they're amazing, utterly amazing, dignified, composed, heartbroken. We heard a range of stories yesterday. We did voice them all up in our podcast, actually, because they were so powerful. I didn't want to cut them. Yeah. So we heard about people being driven to alcohol, people losing their jobs, people contemplating suicide, mums and dads saying, I can't have more children because what if something happens to them? Mum saying, if I take my son, daughter to the doctor, I don't leave them on their own. I can't leave them on their own with a medical professional. Every one of them talked about massive trust issues.
How do you trust again after that?
Well, these babies were in the place they should have been the safest. And, you know, the thing that's just so macabre is she made friends with these parents. You know, she was over the top, you know, sending them cards and being their sort of in their ear.
Did she not dress one of the children who passed?
So she dressed the twins, the two of the three triplets at the end, baby O and baby P. She dressed them in matching blue outfits and took them to their parents. She also, we found this out in the victim impact statement, and I think this is what broke most of us, that one of the parents of the baby had, when the baby had died, she'd had, the hand and footprints were taken, and she'd had them made into a pendant. And she always wore the pendant because it made her feel close to her son.
Yeah.
Then she found out when Lucy Letby was arrested, she realised that it was Lucy Letby who had taken those hand and footprints. So she could no longer wear the pendant because it was so tainted by her. I mean, she did say, actually, she started to wear it again because it signified now justice rather than evil, which I thought was incredible. Another parent of another baby said that, and this again is tough to listen to, her baby was buried in a shawl, and the shawl had been chosen by Lucy Letby. And she said she was just haunted by that because, you know, her son is buried in the shawl that the killer chose for him. And that haunts her. So we heard all these details that in the trial, you see, in that cold forensic trial, which, if we're being fair, is what convicted her, the way it was done, the forensic nature of it is what has convicted her and got to justice. But, of course, none of this was relevant to that, if you like. So we didn't hear most of this until yesterday. And it just did lay bare for everyone the absolute human tragedy, absolute tragedy on every level, unthinkable on every level that this could happen for so long. And you possibly know that what we learned in the trial was that nothing really happened in June 2015 that made Lucy Letby suddenly start to behave in this way. There's no evidence to anything that, you know, sparked it or started it, not that I think there's anything that could. So the police are going back to 2011, to when she started her nursing career.
Okay.
And they have told us on the podcast that that is a lot of babies that they are now going to have a look at. They're calling it a medical review. They're saying people don't need to worry and panic if parents think if babies have been impacted over that period. Parents will already be aware. Yeah. But it is, you know, it's every baby who's ever come into contact with Lucy Letby, and that is over 4,000.
That is frightening. We know what's happened to Lucy Letby. How are things going to change? Because there does need to be change in the health system, and there is. We briefly mentioned it there, but you know they are talking about whether or not people on trial do need to be in court when the victim impact statements are read out. So, what impact does this case have on the legal system and on the healthcare system in the UK?
Well, so two separate points, I suppose. There, one on defendants in court. Yes, the Home Office are definitely looking at a change in the law. We were told that the day before the verdicts, actually, in the sentencing, we got that back. The problem they've got is that if you're Lucy Letby or Thomas Cashman or not Thomas Cashman actually, because he didn't get a whole life term, but if you're a defendant who gets a whole life term, what more can they do? What more can they add on to your sentence? Yeah. You know, I don't know what the consequence could be in our country. If you're getting a whole life term, there's nothing else that you could do. And if you're getting a 40-year tariff, would an extra couple of years for not coming into court make that much difference to you? I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a tricky one, and I'll be interested to know what they do decide to do, because I know they're looking at it, and I don't know that there's an easy answer. I don't think with a type of country that would bring someone into a dock kicking and screaming by force. I can imagine prison guards would not want to be involved in something like that. But, those decisions are currently being discussed behind the scenes. Big questions around the hospital, though. We obviously know now there will be an inquiry. Now, what we've been told so far is that it's a non-statutory inquiry. Now, what that means is that it's a bit quicker than a statutory inquiry, but they're not always in public, and witnesses cannot be compelled to appear. So, the four consultants who were named in court have all issued statements to say they would cooperate with any inquiry. So they've already said that. But we spoke to a lawyer today on the podcast, and they were saying to us that the problem with a non-statutory is that it's not just witnesses appearing, it's documents. They can't compel documents and emails and conversations and things in writing to be, that can't be compelled to be used either as part of the inquiry. So certainly the consultants on the ward and the parents want this to be a statutory inquiry so that witnesses and documents can be compelled to be part of it. Yeah. I've no idea whether the government will change their mind. I would say that doesn't seem likely, as they announced this inquiry within a day of us knowing the verdict. So we wait to see whether these people who were named in court and have been criticised as part of the process will cooperate with that inquiry.
And what about the podcast, The Trial of Lucy Letby? Is the final episode done, or will you still be following what happens in this case?
Yeah, no, great question, actually. No, we're still going strong, actually. We've just got, to be honest, Trina, we've got so much content that we want to bring people. We've made a few more episodes. We will certainly follow any inquiry that's to come. But I think we're still going strong for a couple of weeks.
And Caroline, what are you going to do for you? Because as I said, it's been tough for everyone, but you've been really involved in this case.
Yeah, no, I have. Do you know, my students at Salford are about to return, and I adore my job as a lecturer. So I can't wait to see them. You may not be aware that a lot of my students have been involved in the podcast. They've been involved in helping to. Yeah, they've been amazing. They've been involved in some of the voiceover work. They've been involved in some of the production work. They've been amazing. They are my biggest fans. So I love my students at Salford. So we're going to have a whole load more starting in about 3 weeks, a whole load of first years. So I'll be absolutely. I think Liz and I are keen to do another court case. I think it's become a successful platform for court reporting. Yeah. We'll see if there's an appropriate one for us to follow. And in the meantime, I'll get on with teaching journalism.
Well, Caroline, thank you for taking time out of your day to chat to us here. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you, Serena.
Thanks, Caroline. That was Caroline Cheetham, co-host of the podcast The Trial of Lucy Letby. That is available anywhere you get your podcast.
Real people, real opinions, real talk radio. The multi-award winning Niall Boylan Show.